So hand it to,
I'll go ahead and get the slide brought up, and Chris Walker and Claire Ward will be presenting from NOAA.
great, welcome.
Actually, we should say welcome in 3D.
Welcome in 3D.
Thank you for.
It's IRL.
Well, as it's been mentioned, I'm Chris Walker with NOAA. This is Claire Ward, also with NOAA. She's our marketing communications manager. The two of us make up a team of a number of staff members who participated with your team in the evaluation of the broadband, how should I put this, landscape in the city. You may know this, we've also been participating with your local PUD in their broadband feasibility study as well. Both projects, for all intents and purposes, have the same goals and objectives, and that is to try and understand what the broadband landscape looks like within the area of their concern and your concern, and then potentially what viable options would make sense for a future broadband development, if future broadband development makes sense at all. In the slide, and you'll notice from your packet, there are quite an extraordinary number of slides. Since it is a study session, our intent and our goal was to give you probably more data than we will ever be able to talk to within, the time slot allotted. And so if, forgive me if I try to go through some slides a little bit faster than you would expect. You're more than welcome, of course, to ask me questions, but we do have a lot of data to go through. So I will at times probably start going a little bit swiftly and then slow down in areas in which I think are more relevant than others. But the packet is for you to digest, spend some time on. There's always opportunity for follow-on questions, and Ben and I talk quite often and can work towards that. Getting started a little bit before we go into what our objectives are, I want to talk a little bit about what broadband is, just to make sure that we're all thinking about it in the same context, because I'll use some terms throughout this discussion that you'll hear over and over again, and I want to be able to talk them through here at the beginning. Two terms are unserved and underserved, and those particular terms are really based on the perception of broadband availability in your area. And broadband availability can be broken into different chunks. One chunk is broadband accessibility. And these are terms that are widely used in our industry when we start looking at rural broadband and the problems that impact rural broadband. Broadband accessibility is generally described as the infrastructure necessary to deliver broadband to the folks that need the broadband. And so when we talk about accessibility concerns, we're talking about the infrastructure that would enable that concern to be eliminated, right? The fiber optic broadband or wireless networks that would be utilized to solve the problem. Another problem we talk about in broadband is affordability. And so there may or may not be accessibility options for broadband, or there are accessibility options for broadband, but if your community cannot afford it, then of course there's a second problem beyond just accessibility. And so broadband affordability is something that we talk about quite often. Then the third is really digital equity, and digital equity being more of a generic term to describe different issues that concern consumers of broadband. You may have an equity problem because of an affordability problem like I described earlier, but you may have an equity problem because people simply just don't know how to use the tools that are given to them, or they may not have the ability to have and acquire laptops to be able to use the tools that are given to them through broadband. And each one of these three different issues, organizations like ours look to figure out ways to overcome those barriers to utilization of broadband, and subsequently funding programs like state and federal subsidization programs help solve those problems by solving them through different financial vehicles. But most of the problems are solved in different forms and fashion. And so we looked at all three of those within our study objectives, as you can see up there on the page. But predominantly speaking, we spent the majority of our time on the broadband accessibility. And so again, the broadband accessibility is more on your infrastructure side, right? The availability of high speed capacity services that meet you as the consumer's needs. So back to the original terms, unserved and underserved. Those two terms are meant to describe your access to broadband in an adequate fashion, and they're predefined by broadband speeds. And broadband speeds are measured by the amount of speed broadband is coming down into your home or maybe down into your business, and the speeds that are going back up into the internet. So download speed, upload speeds, and they're typically talked about within a number, and it's a megabits per second. The FCC determined many, many years ago what an accessible amount of broadband is to your home that was adequate at 10 megabits down, 1 megabits up. And that was a FCC number that held on for many, many, many years. And many of the networks in the urban marketplaces provided broadband in excess of that. That eventually became inadequate, and people's consumption of broadband grew and grew and grew. And therefore, the broadband definition was redefined, and it became 25.3, so 25 megabits down and 3 up. So you're underserved if you have a broadband speed at your home, at your business that is less than that 25.3 number. Therefore, your area or your community potentially has availability of grant funding to help overcome that broadband barrier. In our world today, there's state legislation out there that is looking to change that number to 100/20. So 100 down, 20 up, and that could change very well this year. Interestingly enough, federal programs for grant subsidization are coming out, are starting to think about things as a 100/20 as well. Why is that important? Because an area that might be considered served today, as soon as those definitions change, is immediately underserved or unserved, depending on who you are and where you are. So when we think about our broadband availability, we're not looking at just today. We're looking at what the capacity is going to look like as these speeds and the rules around these speeds change as well over time. Our state, Washington State, has a broadband goal by 2028 of 150/150. So 150 symmetrical, meaning it's down and up at the same speed. Why the transition? Well, COVID is a great example. We all went home to work. We took our kids and we sent them home to go to school. And now all of a sudden, we're not using broadband simply to watch Netflix. We're doing it to live our lives from a work capacity perspective and an education capacity. And now all of a sudden, we're shoving information back into the world instead of just being recipients of information. Last time I met all of you, we were on a Zoom call and I was sending you my signal and I looked great, I know. But it took a lot of bandwidth for me to send that. And so I need a good connection in order for us to do business together as I lived in, I live in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. So those speeds are going to evolve over time. And it's not the end, right? Those numbers are going to continue to grow as the years pass. With all that said, and I'm already starting to eat up time, these were the objectives of our broadband plan, as you see on there. We're working diligently with Kittitas County. We're working diligently with Kittitas PUD, looking at the entire county, what the potential solutions are. And we're looking at ways specifically how to identify the broadband gaps in city limits and what potential solutions are associated with those broadband gaps. In our evaluation, we wanted to, Claire's going to talk a lot about the broadband gaps. But as we look at the broadband gaps, we want to look at what it is it's going to take to solve those broadband gaps as it relates to business planning. And even though many people talk and think about broadband as a utility, at the end of the day, it takes capital to build it, it takes revenues to run it, and it's got a large expense associated with it. And so in many ways, it's simply a business. So with that said, as a municipality or as a port district or as a public utility district, what are your business planning options when it comes to broadband that you should take into consideration? And the four are up there on the screen. And I'm going to go through each one of them. Interestingly enough, the business planning level that a public benefit network could go through has changed drastically over the last 3 or 4 years. Organizations that originally were limited to one kind of business case now have access to all the different business cases because the restrictions and the barriers of those have been eliminated by our state legislature. Nonetheless, these four different options are fundamentally the four that we took into consideration and are the most logical ones that would be considered for a municipal broadband network. In the upper, for you would be the upper left-hand corner, so it's left, make sure you look at it, is the open access model. And open access was a model originally created because public utility districts in our state were looking to build broadband networks. And they were looking to build broadband networks because they already had an electrical network that strategically could be used to build fiber on, right? They have the poles. And so they started looking at how do we go about building broadband in an effort to deliver services to our community, and do that in a day in which the internet was pretty new. This was been 20 plus years ago. As they were looking through that, the state legislator decided that, yeah, we like the idea of a public utility district providing broadband services, but they're a regulated organization and therefore they're going to get regulated when it comes to broadband as well. And they were given authority to do open access. What is open access? Open access is simply the concept that says you will be a wholesaler, meaning that as the provider of broadband, you will not have a direct relationship between you and the consumer of that broadband, whether it's a homeowner or whether it's a business. It'll be provided by a retail service provider, a cable company, a phone company, who have you. But the infrastructure itself can be supplied by the public utility. Or in your case, if we wanted to translate that into a real world situation for yourself, you, the municipality, would be the infrastructure provider of that broadband service. But the contract is held between the ISP, the regional service provider, or the phone company or whoever. And why that business case is the way it is because it protects private investment in their delivery of broadband while encouraging infrastructure investment by a utility or a municipality. And so open access has been a concept that the public utility districts in our state have been utilizing over 20 years. In addition, they've been utilizing the excess capacity model that's just directly below that. In fact, most of them started in an excess capacity model. So what would that be? An excess capacity model, not too dissimilar than the model that you currently adhere to. You're building infrastructure for your own needs. So your own municipal needs. You're building it from City Hall to the public safety building, wherever. And then because broadband has capacity availability on it that can be used for other things, you provide that available capacity to other organizations to lease because you have an excess amount. Why is that different than building out an entire network? Well, building out an entire network, you're intentionally building to everyone, hoping that they will come and buy your service. In an excess capacity model, you're saying, we're going to build it. We have a need for ourselves. And then if people do or do not buy, it really doesn't matter. We don't care. We needed that infrastructure for ourselves regardless. You can maintain an open access network and an excess capacity network at the same, in the same avenue because they're very, because the way you sell services is very similar to the way you build the network in an excess capacity model. Now I'm going to go, what would be counterclockwise here. We're going to move into retail. Retail is exactly what you think it is. You build a broadband network and then you sell that network services to the businesses or to the homes. Anybody that wants to buy it, you sell it. Traditionally speaking, retail is provided by private sector. The private sector, ISPs, RSPs, and so forth, do and provide services in a retail fashion. The one challenge that has occurred over the years is that there's been discriminatory practices around the retail product offering. And so traditionally speaking, when a public benefit network provides a retail service, they do it in a non-discriminatory fashion, meaning that you will have a predetermined rate sheet. It'll be approved by city council, and then all subscribers to that rate sheet get the same price for a similar service.
Just a clarification for me. You've used public benefit network a few times. Is that a legal entity?
No, a public benefit network would be somebody such as yourselves providing a network for the public's benefit. PUDs provide a public benefit network. Your existing network is a public benefit network. You're doing it for the benefit of the public. Lastly, public-private partnerships. if you are running around with broadband people, you might see and hear them say the word or the term PPP. That's the acronym, public-private partnerships. Unlike an open access network where the public benefit network builds and then a multitude of ISPs and RSPs resell it, in a public-private partnership, the public benefit network is still built and constructed, but we partner with one organization and one organization only. So you may partner in your public-private partnership with a local internet service provider. You may partner with somebody from the outside who comes in and provides that partnership. Why this is important and why people consider it in their business modeling is in many of our rural marketplaces, how should I put this? There aren't a multitude of service providers available. In fact, in some regions where it's very rural, there's just one, right? And that's part of the downfall of open access is that, yeah, I want to be open access, but I only have one ISP in my town. And so I have no choice but to use them and there is no competition. And so many organizations will start to think to themselves, okay, what is in the best interest of the public? And in this case, it may be a public-private partnership where we put all of our eggs into one service provider's basket. The upside is that you have a mutually beneficial relationship. You can you have quality control and other components of management that allows you to ensure your community is getting the service that you built the network for in the first case. This is an important slide, and these are the kind of topics I probably could talk to for an hour, but I do want to move on, but I want to pause if there's any questions.
So the open access, the difference between the open access and the public-private partnerships is that the open access would allow for multiple third-party participants versus just one.
That's right.
And the downside, a possible downside for the public-private partnership is it's kind of acts as a monopoly because there aren't other options.
Yeah.
Okay.
And many of us really want competition. And so it's more than just having access to broadband, it's having multiple providers that are delivering it in a mechanism that they're competing. Therefore, customer service is improved and costs go down because we're competing against each other and all the typical things that you can probably imagine that would come with a competitive network.
So Chris, just one more. So if you had a public-private partnership, there would be a contract by which you could set price or at least influence the behavior of your partner.
Yeah, you're thinking about it exactly correct. If you're going to enter into a public-private partnership, you're going to have a mutually beneficial contract. From your perspective, what's mutually beneficial is that they're providing an affordable cost to your constituents, and so you would write that kind of language in the relationship, in the contract.
And a certain level of service.
That's right. Customer satisfaction rules, service level agreement rules, all those kinds of things that protect your people. Yeah. Really quick on this one, because I do want to keep moving. This is, in a nutshell, what we're trying to accomplish in a task list. We're going to, and Claire will talk about we'll identify the areas of need and concern, those areas in which people are in need of broadband because there's a problem that we want to solve. We will also work towards a shovel-ready design. In our world, many public benefit networks are built by grant subsidization programs. Grant subsidization program requires you to have a shovel-ready design. And the shovel-ready design enables you to understand what the darn thing is going to cost. And so we do this kind of activity to, one, see what it is that we could theoretically build, and then see what it is likely to cost. So then we can do business planning associated with it. And then last, when it comes to the business planning associated with it, I just said, we'll build some operating models that enable us to find out how the financials will look on this shovel-ready design when we go to market in this theoretical business plan that we put together. In your packet, if you have the digital version, that interactive map, you can click on it. And I won't go there now because it's quite time consuming, but all the fun things that we talk about here are all available on that GIS platform. And you can see all the community survey data, and you can click on and off different things and really interact with your community as you see all of their satisfaction and dissatisfaction with the broadband landscape in your area. And then we also have some tools that show what other people consider broadband is in your area, such as the FCC and the State Broadband Office.
Oh, that's you.
Hi, Council. Thank you for having us here this evening. You might remember a few months ago, we did launch that community-wide survey, and we had a great response countywide. Almost 1,000 surveys came in, 333 directly within the city limits and your urban growth area. So these are just a couple little screenshots that give you a quick glance at what some of that data looks like. The colors on here reference those broadband thresholds that Chris discussed. So anything that's red in the download, the top picture, that didn't meet the FCC's definition. So that was lower than 25 megabits download. The red in the bottom is the upload version, right? So anything red there didn't meet that 3 megabits upload that the FCC says is broadband. All the yellow dots, they were higher than that FCC threshold, but they were lower than Washington's broadband goal of that 150 symmetrical.
I just had a question about that. So is the measurement of the speed, is that geo-referenced or is that self-reported in the survey?
So when they took the survey, most folks who took it on their home computer,
Mhm.
and then they were able to take a speed test at the end of
Okay.
it. So it connected all of their survey data with their location and speed test.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Can I ask one more? So this is just, you have a wire to your home. This is not your fiber to your home. This is not anyone with like getting their satellite kind of.
That's a great
internet
question.
service.
It's everything.
is
So what this
everything.
actually maps is what people are experiencing in their homes for their internet connection.
Okay.
Now, speed tests are not perfect, but they do give you, when you can gather hundreds of them, they do give you a snapshot of what you're dealing with. Speed tests are influenced by things, right? If your router isn't the correct router, it can impact your speed test. If you're out in the garage and you know your system's inside the house and you're on a wireless connection, it's not going to give you the same results. So with speed tests, you do kind of have to blur your eyes and see what the data is saying and not take one single result as more impactful than it should be, right? But when you do have hundreds of them, they will give you a good set of data. So then the ones that we want to see are the green dots. And unfortunately, there aren't a lot of them. Those green dots are the ones that met the 150 megabit download or the 150 megabit upload threshold. And that's Washington State's stated goal of the 150 symmetrical service that they're hoping every household in the state will have by 2028. So there's some work to do. Oh, I missed something there at the bottom. Don't know how to click back, but 93%, I think, 95% of your community said that they considered broadband a utility service. Now, I will say we asked that question pre-COVID and the responses were different, right? I think the tide has definitely turned. The question did even say in parentheses, like power and water, right? Is this a utility like power and water? And that exists now. Broadband is a utility in the public's eye. Now, this is a little bit different, right? So this is actually, what is your satisfaction with the speed? So this is really important to couple with that speed test data to understand some folks who are using broadband, 25.3 is going to be perfectly adequate. Some folks who have 10.1, it's going to be perfectly adequate. So it's important to get that data about their satisfaction with the services that they're experiencing. And I mean, overall, 70% is a rather good satisfaction level. The average speed, as you'll see at the bottom, was 89/26, which was higher than I expected. And that's higher than we see in a lot of places. But it's still well below those future goals, right? It's still not 150. So what this data signals to me is that while probably most folks have service that will get them through right now, that might not be the case in the future.
Good question. Do you, in other communities, do you see a correlation between the satisfaction percentage and the speed averages? In other words, if our speeds were significantly lower or just a little bit lower, we would probably see a reduction in satisfaction? Or?
Yeah, I think this really speaks to if it impacts your ability to do what you need to do, right? And most folks really don't need gigabit symmetrical connections right now. The reason those are getting talked about and pushed so much is we will need them someday. If you want to do Zoom and you have a true 25/3 connection, you're probably going to be able to do it. Now, if you're doing it, your spouse is doing it, and you have 3 kids doing it, you might run into some issues. But that's why we really want to connect that satisfaction level with the speed tests to understand how your community is experiencing it. I'm going to try to go a little bit quick because we do have so much to get through. This one usually is pretty high, and it's high in your community. Folks do find their services to be quite reliable. The only time that we see this one really look dismal is when you have large swaths of the community on traditional satellites. They're really high satellites. Then people are not happy with their reliability. But as expected, this one's fairly okay here. And then value. So this is where things got a little trickier. So you had about 62% of the respondents saying that they weren't satisfied with the value of their services. So that's tying their service quality and their service price, right? So the average cost of service across all of the surveys we received was about $70 a month, which is pretty standard. That's not a crazy number. Some communities are paying $100 on average, right, for their internet service. In major metros, we do see it a little bit lower. And this might be an experience that there is a pretty healthy competition here. And we're going to get to that in a future slide. But you do have more than one ISP. So maybe they're expecting the services to be better for that price. There was a community we worked with in a very remote region of Washington, and they were paying $100 a month. And their services were dial up. It was awful. And they were pretty happy with what they were paying because they were just so excited to have service, right? So we might be seeing something a little bit opposite of that here. So here's one that speaks to a little bit about the competition. We asked the survey takers how many providers were available at their location. Now, 40% did say only one. So that's challenging, but 39% said one. I don't know if that's what I just said. 47% reported having 2 providers. So that's good. We start getting a little bit of free market happening, and only 15% said 3+. So you can take this data and reflect on those business models that Chris was just discussing earlier and think about how that affects services. And this is a word cloud. One of the questions was pretty open-ended, and it was like, is internet access important to you and why? So this is just important to highlight some of the things that folks were writing into you about. Internet, work, home, right? Family, speed, meetings. It doesn't take a lot of staring at this to understand what they were saying over and over again. Essential. And then this is just a quick look at some of the community uses. So 25% of the respondents said that they had students in their home, school-age children. Those are represented by the green dots, green yes, red no. But the one on the right is maybe more surprising and something new, that 62% of the households reported at least one person was working from home. So that again, I think speaks to maybe partially the COVID situation we're living in. But I also think that because of COVID, we're going to have more and more folks working from home, at least part-time in the future. And I'm going to kick it back over to Chris so he can get into the network design. Thank you.
Any questions on the study side? I think when I look at those different results and dots on the map, I think that I want to go log into that interactive map I talked about earlier and just kind of get a good feel for those things. Click them on and off, take a look. It is what your community is telling you is important to them and how well they're being served by the local landscape, and then what they feel it needs to be done about it. And if you look at them long enough, you can form conclusions on what that looks like. At the end of the day, there's probably no denying that the economic development of your community relies on a number of things. Broadband is going to be one of those things. And so we wanted to build a broadband network that not only met today's broadband speed goals, but also met the future broadband speed goals, and then had some relatively assurance that it was future proof. And so what we built was a fiber optic network that provided broadband connectivity access to everyone by building a distribution and backbone network and what we call a feeder system to every home and business within city limits, including some future development areas. In the shovel-ready design, and let me phrase what shovel-ready means. Essentially means that we've designed enough of this system that if we had to, we could hand it over to a contractor with a little bit of engineering and permitting, they could really start to build and construct this. More than likely could build and construct this based on our estimated costs that we assign to the shovel-ready design. And that gives us as leaders the ability to confidently say, if we go about our business of building this business, that we feel confident we can build at the cost of which we outlined in doing so. And I'm going to go a little bit fast here because there's a bunch of shovel-ready designs that you can all look at on your own, but it is going to give you the data that you need in order to understand what a network of this magnitude would look like and what it would cost for you to do, build and operate. We did design the network into 4 sections. We originally designed we originally had a concept of a network based on neighborhoods. And we found that from a network design perspective, it became quite challenging because we had upwards of 20 different neighborhoods we wanted to individually look at. The reality of it is networks are challenging to look at as individual silos. Yes, you can build them as individual silos. It's just really hard to look at them from a large landscape perspective in that way. And so in lieu of that, we developed a 4-zone system, as you can see on the map, and then separated the city within those 4 different zones, and then built pods of networks. Now they're all related to each other and connect to each other, but it gives us the ability to separate and segment the network out both from costs and from take rates and customer surveys to better look at the area more granularly. We won't get into that detail here, other than you do have it in your slides. But do know that we looked at it in that fashion. In addition, we looked at this network leveraging all of the existing network that has already been built in this community. And I'll talk about that more in other slides, but it was very beneficial to leverage the existing network that has been built over these past years in order to keep our construction costs down. So a number of slides, a lot of activity in this slide, but what you will see, and I'm just going to roll up the discussion into a quick talking point. The cost of the project is $16.7 million. This is an all-in. We build fiber up and down every road that the design calls for, with the ability to have an access service drop to every home and business that subscribes. So service drop is the cable, of course, that goes from the distribution network to the home. This also includes today's electronics that you would expect to do in a network where you want to supply services at 150/150. In fact, the way networks are designed and built these days is we're actually building them at gigabit, both down and up. And so this network is gigabit capable. In fact, the network that we designed could and is easily upgradable to 10 gigabits per second. Down and up. And there are people that are saying that by 2030, that is what our residential consumer will need. Is that true? I don't know. But we do see our broadband needs growing really quickly. And we do see things like cars running on broadband, right? Streetlights running on broadband. Next thing you know, you're going to have broadband all around you, and you're going to need, aluminum foil on your head. Nonetheless, broadband is coming, and it's coming everywhere. And so we fully suspect our consumption is going to grow. So we designed a network capable of meeting those growths and being future proof.
Quick question on the service. Is that over here?
I'm sorry. This is math.
I'm sorry. I just wondered, when you talk about service lines, are we talking trenching and everything's below ground, or are we talking about stringing them above ground?
It's going to be all the above. So we're leveraging your poles where poles are available because it's more cost-effective method, but there's lots of areas where you're going to be removing asphalt, trenching, and doing those kinds of things. A couple items on here that are important. Like I said, $16.7 million to build. Cost of the backbone is $9 million, and then your cost of activation, connecting your customers, is $7.7 million. This is based on an overall adoption rate of 40%. Put that 40% in the back of your mind. So we're going to talk about it further in the discussion. So the more customers you connect, the more activation costs you're going to have. And so these costs go down with less subscribers. These costs go up with more subscribers So those numbers would fluctuate with how successful your marketing campaign is on delivering services to your homeowners. And then these other items are just metrics, right? To give you a sense on what it's going to cost to run it in individual components such as the service drop and project management and activation. And then you'll see the total customer count on the upper left-hand corners as well. And like I said, I am going to go fast, but please stop me at any point. Within our models, both in the open access model and in the retail model, we evaluate what the costs were going to be associated with delivering services to your homeowners. I will tell you, in an open access model, you're relying on the retail service providers and the cable companies and the phone companies and others to really be the customer access machine, meaning they'll have the salespeople, they'll have the technicians that go to the home and do the installations, and they'll manage outages and so forth. And so under that assumption, then you would assume that your open access model from a delivery perspective is going to be more affordable from operations and expense. Whereas if you went into the retail side where you're responsible for everything, then you would assume, and we'd model it in that manner, that you would spend more money on operations and expense. Here in this particular example, I'm also showing you in the pie charts where the majority of the costs go. Within the network operating expense, sales and marketing expense, and business administration expense, there of course are subcategories. But regardless, and that's why you can see so many slices in the pie. But the majority of your expenses when it comes to an open access model are going to be within your pole attachment fees, meaning broadband pays the pole attachment fees, and within your broadband manager, your employee base that helps manage the network. Yes, sir.
So, help me understand the total cost of activation. That's a constant through all models. Because I guess.
Yeah, so if you think about the way the network's going to get built is we're going to bring a service drop cable to a homeowner. And then the activation is really simply going to the home, installing a device, getting it configured and connecting to the
If we're
homeowner.
using open access, isn't the ISP doing that?
So great catch. So there's two answers to that question. In one model, you could require that of the ISPs to do. And then in another model, you could do that and perform that work yourself. You have the ability as the owner of the network to do either of those two things. Okay. And so traditionally, the cost of that work has to be borne by somebody, whether it's the ISP or whether it's you, the network owner. In this particular example, what we did is we determined that we were going to be, we being yourselves, we would expend the money associated with that activation in order to eliminate installation fees associated to the homeowner. The barrier that we've identified is cost from an installation perspective. In most of our your municipal broadband brethren, the installation costs when they put the burden onto the homeowner can be upwards of $2,500, and therefore people don't buy. And so if you have a zero take rate, you have no revenues. And so we made the determination that we were going to spend the funds to build the infrastructure.
Okay, so I'm not trying to, but this seems to be a key piece for me in trying to understand. So if I'm on Spectrum now, I make a call, they're climbing up a pole, they're running cable, they're running it, drilling it out and connecting it in my house.
Mhm.
In essence, there's a backbone on that pole, right? But I'm not getting charged $2,500 to run from that pole to my house. I mean, there's an installation fee.
By Spectrum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Spectrum.
Or the phones.
That's
I mean,
right.
it doesn't make a difference.
That's right.
But
So absolutely. The difference between your network and Spectrum's network is Spectrum's network has been up and operational for 50 plus years. And so they've already capitalized all the infrastructure that they've built and delivered around your system or your city. You are a brand new network. Every dollar spent has to be a dollar earned in some form or fashion. And so it's all new network for you. And whether you build the distribution network and pay for it, or whether you build just the access network and pay for it, it has to get paid for. And our determination is that we were going to build a network and fund it in such a way that it was borne by the public benefit network, in this case, as yourself. And then you'll charge fees to the open access provider to deliver the service to the homeowner. And we kept them down. We kept them down in an effort to increase take rate.
Yeah, I mean, I understand conceptually what you're trying to get to. I'm just trying to put it in a context that's also understandable to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
absolutely get that.
I had a question related to that. So open access, you mentioned phone companies. I assume you're talking about cell phone companies as opposed to. our
No, more like
local-
your CenturyLink or the
Okay,
or
okay, well-
Frontier or those kinds of.
Okay,
phone
I guess my
companies.
question, and a part of that was, so where does 5G fit into this in terms of a competitor, if you will? Because our understanding is that the cell phone companies are investing heavily in 5G networks, which, as I understand it, means that you at some point could have a wireless 5G connection for your internet service.
That's right.
So.
And yeah, so let's, if you're a homeowner and you want a high-speed, reliable broadband system in your home that you can use effectively, and it's effective, more than likely, you're going to subscribe to two services. One, you're going to subscribe to a cellular service, and we all do that today. Every one of us does. Then you're also going to subscribe to a home use system. And the home use system is what your TV is going to work off of, your computer is going to work off of, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One option is you could subscribe to Verizon's 5G wireless access point, and then your home system could run off that. You're still going to subscribe to your cell phone.
Mhm.
So that tells me you're going to have two connections. It may both be with Verizon, but you're going to have two connections. You're going to have two services.
Yeah, and I guess the heart of my question was, that would be our competition in the future.
That would be your competition. Absolutely.
Okay.
So would the incumbents be your local competition, and so would new technologies and new service providers coming into the industry directly competing.
So we have about 10 minutes
Okay.
to wrap this up.
Okay. I suggest I get through all the capital slides and get more towards the end, if that makes sense from a 10-minute perspective. Okay. You have all these. If I will, as I go, we based our financials both on two models. Stop me if I go too fast. On two models, both an open access model and a retail model. You will see in both of those numbers that we did similar assumptions in order to have a more apples to apples. Oops, I went too far. No, I'm going to stop here. In order to have a more equitable comparison. So in the open access model, we derived with a rate structure that you would charge to the homeowner and to the business through the internet service provider, which means the internet service provider is going to mark that fee up a certain amount. And then in the retail model, it's a higher revenue stream and higher fees because you have a direct relationship with the homeowner. Therefore, you are going to charge more in order to recover more of your costs. You're going to have a higher sales and marketing costs. You're going to have more network expenses. You're going to be responsible for all the breaking, the fixing. You're going to be responsible for everybody who calls and says, I have a problem and I need help. And then you're there to help them. And so the expenses are going to be higher, and you're going to see that the revenues are going to be higher as well. And of course, the charges to the homeowner and to the business are going to be greater. In both models, we did not change the take rates, 40% in both situations in order to have an apples to apples comparison. Ben and his team have the data, and they can then manipulate different scenarios at whim to determine whether things look worse or better at 40% take rate, at 80% take rate. You can get the idea. What it gives us is the ability to understand the financial problems or benefits of building this citywide network. Really quick, the fiberhood slide, since I'm short on time. Yes, sir.
Just real quick, is the 40% predicated on your experience in other communities? So
40%.
Where did
yeah.
that,
It's a fantastic question. 40% in your community is going to be a challenge. I would say that because of your survey results, although you are not looking very strategic in your future broadband speeds, because you've got really a 25-3 concern there that you saw on her first slide, people are looking to start to be dissatisfied. And so they're going to look for better speeds, and that's going to be a natural occurrence. So the question is, are your local providers going to be able to deliver those higher speeds at the rate in which the community is going to demand them? And if the answer is no, then yeah, you may see that 40% take rate. If the competition is growing their network and expanding with high performance, then those numbers are going to be quite concerning. Those numbers still made the network look financially challenging. And so if you take more money away from the project, they become even more challenging. So and you actually asked a good question earlier about helping to provide fees or revenues for installations. And so we were going to talk a little bit about the Fiberhood program. That is in here for you to refer to. It is just simply a tool that others use, specifically Mason PUD, to help fund the offset the high cost of installation. What's important about this slide is that the public utility district, and we all think about take rates being so poor in the public utility district, what they learned in their open access model utilizing Fiberhood is that the take rates were quite exceptional. Please keep in mind with Mason PUD, they're far more rural than yourselves, and their satisfaction levels in those kinds of surveys don't quite look as attractive. Okay. What time is it? 14 minutes till? Okay.
We need at least a 5-minute break in between.
5-minute break. I apologize for not getting through this. We probably packed too much information into one sitting. One thing we do want to recognize that this project would have been extraordinarily expensive, not that it already isn't, but it would have been extraordinarily expensive had you not already invested as much as you have into the network. We're seeing nearly $4 million in savings in our capital outlay because of the existing network. What that tells us is that from a future perspective, your investment has been fruitful, not just because it's impacted the community, but it's because it's positioning you to have more options than you would have had you not spent the money on in such a manner. As we're narrowing it down to the last few slides, Ben, we did want to talk about things that we would like you to take into consideration so we can think about how we want to position ourselves in the future. These are items that we want you to think about and form an opinion on, and they all are relative to where we think we need to take this network in the future. As you remember from my opening slides, I had 4 business models: open access, retail, PPP, and then excess capacity. You are essentially doing an excess capacity network and you're making a difference. You have a great customer base who needs your service. Heck, even my company uses your service, and we utilize your service to deliver 911 public safety, not just to your community, but statewide. And so it's been incredibly impactful. These kinds of networks work. Most of our PUD networks in the state work off of an excess capacity model. They make a difference. And we believe strongly that in continuing that excess capacity model and looking for creative ways to find solutions where solutions need to be made, that we can continue to affect the landscape of your community without necessarily looking at a citywide network where we're spending $16+ million to build out. And so we think that there's opportunities here to continue with that strategy towards an eventual larger network if the opportunities arise in such a fashion. And then lastly is the set of questions that we were going to utilize for this last part of our discussion, where we wanted to start talking as a group about where we want to take the citywide network in the future. And so had I had more time, we probably would have dove into each of these questions in more detail, but it sounds like I still have 5 more minutes. So we'll try to do that first. And I thought it would be great with these questions is really trying to encourage a conversation for the 5 minutes that we have. And so we would ask ourselves, as city representatives, do we view broadband as a utility? The second you start thinking about things in that manner, things change, right? The electrification of the United States was really based on people thinking about electricity as a utility. And now we all have electricity and we all enjoy all the fruits of that labor. Broadband could be considered the same thing.
Yeah, I'm going to ask process here. My understanding was we were leading up to a full discussion of these questions to provide support for the staff and direction for the utility. And I'm concerned that we would blow through these. So I don't know what.
Well, I think we need to talk about scheduling some time. to do
Sure.
this.
And I would recommend, we actually have space on our next study session, which is March 7, I believe. And so we could certainly continue this discussion because we certainly want to leave this with some direction from council and the UAC about what the next step is.
The alternative is we, at the UAC, we can walk through this as well prior. I think, I can't remember when the meeting is, but you know, you could refer back to UAC to scope some of this out and then bring it back. As well.
I'm not vested. I just, I know that it feels like we're at a moment, both from a funding investment standpoint and internal resource point, that we need to make these, we need to provide this direction sooner now rather than later. So my sense would be perhaps for US, I mean, we've talked about a joint meeting, if even, my sense would be to get this back in front of council so that we can provide the policy direction and understand the implications.
Would we have a full hour on March 7th?
We could make that happen, yes.
I think we're going to need a full hour.
Or 55 minutes.
Mhm.
Yeah, we could schedule that.
Yeah, I would say,
Absolutely. And I feel awful that we tried to cram so much
Well,
into
Well,
45
it's on
minutes.
us. We're the ones that.
no, unrealistic
I mean,
expectations.
Usually
I
when you
think.
get a packet that's 72 slides, you think you're not going to get it done in an hour.
Yeah.
I was just going to say on this, the top description up there, I think is telling. And I think as we're looking at this in 2022, I think we need to know if we look at that top description and update it with current numbers, what has changed in the community for us to make a different decision or keep the same
Yeah,
decision,
and
right?
if I may, just one other question for us to ponder just as we go into this. Because I noticed there was another Commerce released additional dollars for rural unserved areas today. And you made a distinction, and I know there is a distinction between unserved and underserved. And it's not clear to me, looking at this, the issue that we've had in our conversations with the county is the county's moved forward, I know, with stuff in the pocket with the PUD. And so they have already begun to access dollars for what are construed to be unserved areas.
Mhm.
So I think part of our conversation needs to be a clarity of our competitiveness
Mhm.
in the current environment to access those dollars relative to unserved or underserved. Because I have truly not seen underserved being a priority in the rural broadband conversation. Going back to conversations we've had with the broadband office, 8 months ago now. So and maybe if you could just address that quickly, and then we can, or provide further information that we could have for our next study session, either which way, I don't care.
Food for thought, 20 seconds or less. The broadband landscape, when it comes to rural broadband, requires some form of subsidization. And that's just a general rule. There are going to be exceptions, of course. The programs available are well-funded, but not funded to the level of which the asks are. And so it's a very competitive landscape for a limited amount of resources. And so you have to look at your project and compare it to other projects who are also equally unserved and underserved, who might also be in a severely distressed category, and compare your project in its competitive nature to other projects to determine whether or not you would win free money. And that's the topic I think we should be having for 10, 15 minutes when we reconvene.
Okay, well, yeah, I think we should, because it feels like we're not, because we've done the investment, we've actually positioned ourselves poorly in the competitive funding world, but well, as a community.
Maybe we're not as needy.
We're always.
There are others
needed.
in more need.
There's always more.
Thank you
Okay,
very
you're
much.
welcome.
for the
Thank you.
presentation, And we will see you again.
Sounds like it. I'm glad to come back. This is the kind of thing that we really enjoy talking about. So.
And we can accommodate Zoom too. Okay. Thank you.